Well, hey, folks, at Utah Valley University, conservative commentator Charlie Kirk was shot and killed by a long-range sniper while speaking to a crowd. The weapon was recovered, and investigators are working through all of the video and tip lines. And the shooter, he remains at large. But I think police are narrowing in on who he is. In fact, they've released an image of him for everyone to hopefully weigh in. Now, I'd like to chat about why somebody might have targeted Kirk, what the recovery of the rifle means in the case, and what campus maps can tell us about shooters and their likely vantage points, and why universities should rethink when they invite polarizing figures to speak. Now, we're going to look at the practical security trade-offs, hybrid options to preserve the debates, and an operational approach that campuses can actually use. Well, hey everybody, welcome to Profiling Evil. You know, I'm on my way home from CrimeCon, and I thought I would just stop because I keep getting texts from those of you who listen to us asking my thoughts on the murder of Charlie Kirk in my home state of Utah. So, we're going to just pull off here. It's kind of a remote spot, and there are a ton of flies around. So hopefully the wind's going to keep blowing and keep these pesky flies off of me. Hit the like and subscribe button. Ring the bell, share Profiling Evil with your friends. But let's jump into this because yesterday, September 10th, 2025, at approximately 12:10 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time, Charlie Kirk was at Utah Valley University for an event on his America Comeback Tour. It was the first stop of this new tour, and it was one of those classic campus moments where energy's raw. A crowd was gathered, cameras were rolling, protesters were outside, and that proved me wrong. Debate-style atmosphere was drawing out both supporters and critics. And then, while Kirk was answering an especially charged question about mass shootings involving transgender individuals, a single bullet struck him somewhere in the upper chest area, but it clearly hit the neck because of the incredible imagery that we saw. In fact, the video imagery was posted on X and several other social media platforms. It was horrific, and I'm really grateful that most of those platforms have already taken down those incredibly horrible videos. Now, Kirk was rushed to a nearby hospital in critical condition and taken, I believe, into surgery, but he was immediately pronounced deceased. Now, what makes this feel like a case study for investigators and campus security planners isn't just the fact that Kirk was shot and killed, but it was how that shot was delivered. Authorities estimate that the round came from about 200 yards away, fired from the direction of the Losi Center, which overlooks that area where the event was taking place. Now, 200 yards for someone with a rifle is not a long shot. Now, that distance lines up with the discovery investigators later announced: the recovery of a high-powered, bolt-action rifle that was believed to be the murder weapon. It's now recovered, but it was found in some trees near the campus. The rifle's recovery moved this from a "who shot Charlie Kirk" into a harder, more concrete phase of the investigation because the weapon on scene gives forensic information, something to test against the projectile, and it opens pathways for fingerprints, DNA, trace evidence, and other forensic work. Now, police detained a person of interest almost immediately, but they released that person after interviewing him. Investigators are working through a huge volume of material: fixed CCTV, secured videos from nearby businesses, and a significant amount of crowdsourced footage and tips, more than 100 in the first day alone. And you can only bet that there is so much video taken from mobile devices that they have to go through. The FBI and the ATF are involved in this investigation, and the classic investigative playbook is now in motion. They're going to be trying to match the bullet, to the rifle that's been recovered. If they found the bullet, they're going to search for the rifle for any kinds of trace evidence that they might find, serial numbers. They're going to try to triangulate the movement of the suspect through videos and phone location data. They're going to try to put together a timeline that links the entrance, the fire egress, and the attempted disposal of that weapon. And if you want to look at that campus yourself, and I'd recommend you do it, you really should jump into some of the official maps on the campus website. I'm going to put the link down below. But the geometry made the shot possible. UVU's main campus map is online, so make sure you go over there. There's also a PDF map that marks the Low-C Center, it's LC on the map, and a parking map that shows where large crowds and vehicles were staged. Motive hasn't been confirmed, and investigators aren't going to announce anything, I hope, until they have something that supports it. But the context helps us reason. Kirk wasn't an anonymous speaker. He's a high-profile conservative organizer who spent years building audience and controversy. He co-founded Turning Point USA and has been a flashpoint for protests and opposition. Now add to that the timing of the shot. He was speaking about mass shootings that involved transgender victims when that shot was fired. Now personally, I think all of that is a red herring, but many people are making much ado about that, so we got to include it in the discussion. But how would that shooter have known that that question was going to come when it did? And in reality, how probable is it that the shooter would sit and wait for that question rather than simply taking the best tactical shot that he had when the timing was right? Regardless, you can begin to see how a politically polarized environment can produce susceptible targets. And here's a tip that I use all the time when I'm researching these kinds of cases, and that is to go over to my partner newspapers.com for the most comprehensive piece of news, historic reporting from the press. And if you're interested in newspapers.com, check the link below because I've arranged for a special 20% discount if you're interested in using newspapers.com. They're really an incredible resource if you want to go deeper into these true crime investigations, especially like on Charlie Kirk, to go back and see the rhetoric that he's shared over the years. You can make the determination whether it contributed to some of the anger that's building up, but it certainly doesn't justify homicide. You know, former Congressman Jason Chaffetz was with Charlie Kirk when he was murdered, and he pointed out that really uncomfortable coincidence of the timing. And again, we got to just keep that in mind. But for investigators, the recovered rifle is a thing that's kind of a game changer in measurable ways, because now they're going to be able to match the ballistics from that recovered weapon. They're going to look at those little lands and grooves, and if they can get the bullet, they're going to be able to compare them to be able to positively say whether that was the rifle that was used to murder Charlie Kirk or not. Forensic teams are also going to be checking that rifle, the bolt, the stock, any place where the hand could have touched. They're going to be doing DNA swabs in hopes that they might pick up skin cells, hair, body fluids. And you know, even if the suspect took real care in cleaning that thing, they seem to always leave a little bit of trace evidence. You know, that location where the rifle was dumped to, that wooded area off campus, is incredibly important, and it points to the level of organization the shooter employed. In fact, in my opinion, based on early reports, it suggests some deliberate pre-planning, an escape route, and the possibility that the shooter knew where he could hide the weapon, perhaps hoping to recover it at some point, but likely to aid in being able to walk away undetected, just one of the hundreds of people that were fleeing the area after the shooting. And that pattern narrows the sort of person that law enforcement's looking for. It's going to be somebody who either scouted the campus ahead of time or knew it well enough to pick that location for the shot, the location to escape, and that location to dispose of the weapon. Now, beyond the forensics, This incident is an indictment of the vulnerability of open-air campus events. Outdoor spaces are incredibly cool places for free expression, but they're also porous. Roofs, parking structures, trees, hillsides, but all of these places, apartment windows, all create locations that could potentially be used by a sniper. Now, many state universities and smaller colleges simply don't have the budget or the manpower to sweep every single building, to look at every nook and cranny, to station rooftop guards or deploy metal detectors everywhere when a visiting speaker comes to town. And that reality forces administrators to make really hard choices. Choices between the ideal of an open campus environment or the practical need to protect the people whose presence can inflame passion. And that brings me to the debate that everybody's having right now. Should universities stop bringing controversial figures to campus? My short answer is yes and no. Yes, campuses should absolutely rethink how they host people who draw protest and crucially credible threats. But no, they shouldn't reflexively cancel every controversial visit that's out there on the books. The heart of higher education is the marketplace of ideas, and live debate has a pedagogical value in that you don't get over a Zoom call, for instance. The middle ground, the pragmatic path, is a risk-based policy that imposes requirements when certain conditions are met. For instance, if a speaker is nationally prominent, if prior threats exist, if crowd dynamics predict unvetted protests, or an outdoor venue leaves multiple uncontrolled sightlines, then perhaps that event should trigger higher security thresholds or move to more of a hybrid model. A hybrid model might make a lot of sense, frankly. It might mean that you host a secure, limited in-person audience that's ticketed and vetted. Maybe you have bag checks, controlled entry, simultaneous streaming of the event to a broader community. This kind of preserves the intensity and the authenticity of a live engagement for the smaller group, while dramatically reducing the number of potential targets visible to somebody who might be planning violence. And it also allows colleges to direct resources where they make the most difference. Controlled indoor venues, for instance, with limited entry points, pre-cleared perimeters, and no accessible adjacent rooftops are safer locations. If the speaker has to be outdoors in order to make some kind of rhetorical point, then the institution needs to treat that choice like staging any risky operation by doing building searches, by deploying medics on site, setting up evacuation routes, and having chain of evidence plans ready in case something happens. You know, things like finding a rifle after a shooting. And I wonder, what would a drone flying overhead have alerted police to? Would it have discouraged a rooftop assault? Possibly. But what about a window at an elevated position? Personally, I'm left wondering even if a drone had been deployed. Now, legal considerations make this tricky because universities, they're going to always be vulnerable to the claims of viewpoint discrimination if they apply these blunt, opaque rules that I'm suggesting, rules that appear to be aimed at certain kinds of speakers and not others. The answer, frankly, is transparency. A predictable, documented risk policy, one that's applied consistently and rests on objective criteria like credible threats, the need for crowd control, the venue's physical characteristics. All of this is the best shield against accusations that the institution is censoring ideas. I think it's important to point out that some public media has already reported that more than 8,000 signatures were signed on ballots asking to cancel this event with Charlie Kirk. Now, again, should that be the thing that elevates this? No, but perhaps it should be taken into the formula. Practically speaking, campus event planners should adopt operational checklists and treat risky events like small-scale security operations. And frankly, I'm sure they did this. And I don't mean for any of my comments to suggest that they didn't. This was probably a no-win situation. I suspect that before the event, they coordinated a risk assessment, that they picked appropriate locations for this to happen, that they swept all the adjacent buildings and they locked off rooftop access. I would hope so. Now on site, there undoubtedly was access ticketing, bag checks, metal detection in some locations. If the risk level merited it, it appeared that they had stationed emergency personnel there because they quickly evacuated Charlie Kirk after he was shot. But now it's the reaction period. They're documenting surveillance sources. They're establishing single intakes for any video that people might have, for tips that are coming in, any crowdsourced footage. Post-incident, they're going to be preserving the evidence, searching for the killer, and preserving the integrity of that crime scene. You know, as I've been digging into this case about the murder of Charlie Kirk, I can't help but see parallels to things I talk about in my book, Wolves in Sheep's Clothing. One of those is how predators often look like everybody else until the moment they strike. They move quietly, they blend in, but then suddenly they reveal their true intent. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. Somebody walked onto that campus, positioned themselves with a high-powered rifle, and changed the lives of hundreds of people in a single second, particularly the life of Charlie Kirk. You know, another point I make in the book is that words can be just as dangerous as weapons, because rhetoric gets weaponized, whether it's from cult leaders, manipulators, or online influencers. And once those words are out there, they can take on a life of their own. Some unstable person scrolling through at late at night, that rhetoric might be the spark that pushes them over the edge. And I think we're watching the dynamic play out right now in real time as the aftermath of this shooting. So if you want to go deeper into the psychology of these kinds of predators and how ordinary looking people can become threats in the blink of an eye, I'd invite you to pick up a copy of Wolves in Sheep's Clothing. You can get signed copies delivered for free in the United States at profilingevil.com or anywhere in the world through Amazon.com or Ingram Spark. But let's talk a little more about Charlie Kirk's deal, because on the investigative side, the recovered rifle is opening the doors. It's also raising questions, like where did this rifle come from? Was it purchased legally or illegally? Does the serial number trace to a retail sale or a private transfer, or perhaps a ghost gun conversion? Was the weapon modified in any way that would help identify a maker or a previous owner? Was the weapon modified in any way to reduce the amount of noise that it makes when it's fired? The practical forensic timeline's familiar though. Ballistic matching, latent print examination, serial number searches, all of that's going to be going on in real time. And when all of these pieces slot together, they form the kind of mosaic that lets investigators move from we have a weapon to now we have a suspect and a motive. And the motive is what really matters here. Even though the motive hasn't publicly been established, the political context here makes it likely a source of inquiry. Was this an act of targeted political violence driven by some ideology? Or was it someone who had a personal rage but chose to select a public figure, Charlie Kirk, somebody with a profile to help him bring it about? Or was it somebody who intended to cause chaos and picked a high-profile target just to get the media attention? I mean, each hypothesis demands different investigative strategies and different messaging from public officials. And we're hearing that now. Lawmakers from across the spectrum have been quick to condemn political violence in the aftermath of this. But it's important because it signals that the democratic practice of disagreement cannot be answered by bullets. But condemnation alone doesn't stop a shooter from acting. We need to have better prevention and smarter event protocols too. Another piece of this story that I don't think we can ignore is what's happening online. In the hours after the shooting, social media lit up with disturbing rhetoric, not just from anonymous trolls, but from influencers and people with voices and real reach. Some of those folks are posting statements of support for the shooter. Others are saying things like, this is what happens when you spread those kind of opinions. And even others are saying, it's now war. Well, let's be clear, folks. That kind of reaction is chilling. When we excuse or even celebrate violence because we dislike somebody's politics, we've crossed into really dangerous ground. Words matter, not just for Kirk's critics, but for his supporters too. When rhetoric heats up, when we dehumanize the other side, it plants seeds of destruction. And sometimes all it takes is that one unstable person scrolling through their phone late at night to finally tip them over the edge. And that's when angry words transform into a trigger pull. And this is why we've got to hold ourselves accountable for the way we talk about each other, the way we interact with each other. Whether you're on the left or the right or somewhere in between, free speech is sacred. But once it gets twisted into something that inspires terroristic responses, everybody loses. So to close, we have to face the hard ethical trade-off. The marketplace of ideas is precious, but it's not an excuse for recklessness with public safety. The Charlie Kirk shooting is a brutal reminder that speech happens in places with roofs and windows and parking structures, and physical realities matter. Universities can and should continue to be places of vibrant debate, but they cannot pretend their grounds are immune to the realities of modern targeted violence. Hybrid options, objective risk policies, granular operational planning, all of these will let institutions continue hosting these controversial voices while reducing the likelihood that those gatherings become a literal battleground, because that's exactly what happened at Utah Valley University in Utah. And it's not just universities where this risk plays out. Think back to July of 2024, the assassination attempt of Donald Trump in that open air arena out in Pennsylvania. The parallels are impossible to ignore. A high-profile political figure, a wide-open setting, and a shooter who found a clear line of sight. Now, thankfully, Trump survived. But the scars from that day, both physical and psychological, are etched into our national memory. And now, placed alongside what just happened to Charlie Kirk at Utah Valley University and many other political figures who have been ambushed and hurt or killed, just like the senator from Minnesota a few months ago, this isn't about whether you support a conservative voice like Kirk or a political heavyweight like Trump or somebody on the Democratic side. It doesn't matter. It's about recognizing that in today's politically charged climate, words are fueling actions. And open-air events, no matter who's on the stage, are becoming magnets for individuals who've been radicalized. Sometimes by their own isolation, sometimes by the rhetoric that they're consuming online. And we don't want to be a part of that, folks. The chilling reality is this: if we don't take both the words and the venues seriously, we're going to see more of these attempts. And I'd really like to know your thoughts. So I hope you'll put them down below. And please weigh in on the comments that others have. Don't make this ugly. Don't make it one way or another. Let's talk about the problem. Now, you can find Profiling Evil on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. And if you like your audio podcasts or your true crime on the go, check out Profiling Evil's audio podcasts on your favorite podcast platform. And go over to profilingevil.com and sign up for our digital newsletter, The Bolo, and spend a little time searching around there. In fact, check out my books and purchase them. And folks, thanks for your support of Profiling Evil. We'll see you soon at the next crime scene.